All right, so welcome tonight, 9th of May, and we're going to be covering Module 9, which is our masonry. A lot to do with pretty much our standard there you can see on the screen. Now, before I basically do get started, do we have anyone here who it's their first time online? Anyone's not their first time online? I know I've got Jake here tonight. Jake's one of the guys I normally train face-to-face who missed this one, so he's in. But other than Jake, anyone else first time online? No, it doesn't look like it. Okay, cool. And so then the other one, is anyone actually not, other than Jake obviously as well, not done this unit before? So I'm just wondering if it's the first time for anybody who's actually done this. No, so it looks like we've all done and just sort of rehashing. Yeah, we do have a couple of guys in the class who are doing this solely online and haven't actually attended any face-to-face sessions, but they're actually not on tonight. So you'll probably find this unit, I find, doesn't vary. There's not too much, I suppose, I can vary up from when you would have done last time. Obviously, there'll be a different voice and maybe a little bit of a different spin and maybe some different definitions. But as far as the exercises go, it won't be like sort of masonry or the subfloor where we can sort of just draw up a plan and say, okay, well, use a type 2 footing and let's design it for me. Or let's make this a Class M raft slab. So you might find, that the activities will be exactly the same. There's no new activities. And there's been no new feedback come from basically students who have gone through as well that I can update you on, because quite often I'll email you out, an interview that someone went through and they had or some latest plans. But nothing new has come through yet. So it looks like they're still training or assessing at the VBA what they have been doing for the last couple of months. So, basically get it started. So, if it is your first time and you haven't worked out how to use the system, so my name's Adam. It's not Maxine, and I do actually apologise for what happened today with the webinar. Not too sure what happened because Maxine is basically the training manager in Builder Registration, and she normally sets up all the webinar, and then all I do is come in and click a button and it starts. And about sort of 5 o'clock this afternoon, I started getting a few texts and a few phone calls from guys saying, oh, I haven't actually received the invite today. And guys who live in Torquay, and I was in Melbourne today, so I was driving back and sort of said, okay, when I get home, I'll sort it out. And so, I was obviously managed to set up the webinar because we're all here. The only downside was I wasn't sure of everyone's email addresses, so I sort of had to go back through past sessions and cut and paste basically all of the email addresses in. So probably 1 or 2 people might have missed out because I didn't actually have their email address, but Ben was one and he texted me, so I emailed it over. So I'm assuming that everyone who wanted to be here tonight is probably here because we've got 12 on. And I think last week we had 16. I reckon 3 people texted me to say that they actually couldn't make it. So apologies for that, but it should be all smooth sailing from here. So basically what we're going to tackle is just our module 9. So if you've got your study buddy or your folder there in front of you, it's there's not that many exercises that we do tonight. There's a little bit of explaining that I do, and it's really about starting at this stage. If you've the way I train the course with my face-to-face students, they normally join on session 1. So by this stage, they're basically 3/4 of the way through the course, and they can really start to, I suppose, manage their way through the standard to start to find a lot of their answers. So I'll explain a bit of stuff and then sort of just set you guys free and have a crack at it. And I find this is probably one of the shorter sessions as well. So I normally also, when I'm doing this in a face-to-face class, then bring up some of the multiple choice and we start to do that. But obviously you guys, if you've done the course already and you're waiting for your interview or waiting for your test, I presume you've got access to that multiple choice on our website anyway. So that'll be something. So we might even finish this just after 8 o'clock tonight. And so that's what I would normally do with my remaining hour of the session. So if you guys have obviously got your login, once it's done, you're not going to be offended if you basically clock off early. So just to get it started, so this is a standard we're going to be using, is the masonry in small buildings, which is Australian Standard 4773. So a lot of the stuff where we're going to be quizzed when we go in, depending on your license type, but it's got to do with like where our weep holes need to be, where our articulation joints, I should say control joints, so I'll try and use the right terminology as per the standard, so where our control joints go. Also, there's a lot about our flashings as well and our damp-proof coursing. So I don't know if any of you guys actually do insurance work, but there's a huge percentage of insurance work is basically through water, whether it be through the wet areas where they're not waterproof properly, or basically the flashings around our windows, and where they actually come in and then they basically get in and they rot out all our studs under our window, and then we've got to pull the plaster off and rectify it. So it is something that even for your own knowledge, just to have a look at it and go, that's how it should be done. And I actually have a few bricklayers in my course at the moment, and also previously when I've trained the course, and they've sort of been, I suppose, surprised when they've seen the standard and gone, geez, actually nobody does that anymore. And so yeah, once you guys become registered, obviously this is going to come back on you. So if it's not done correctly, and 12 months down the track that someone gets a water leak, they'll be ringing you as the builder to basically come back and fix it. And it's going to be pretty time consuming and cost a bit of money if we're going to start pulling off internal linings and or if it's double brick or whatever it's going to be, to make sure that building is actually flashed properly and basically it's not leaking. So one thing I will show you, and you would have one copy of this, probably just one page of it. I'll just bring it up. This is I'll make this a little bit smaller so you can see it. So I think you guys actually have this in your study buddy, or it's called the study buddy. That's your folder that you get given when you come to class. But I've also got the whole booklet that comes to it. So I'm going to send this out to everybody sometime tonight. And what it is, I'll just make this a little bit smaller, and then I'll make it bigger as we go to read it. Probably a bit too small there. This is basically the Australian Window Association, and it steps through basically how something should be installed, how it should be flashed, and so on. So this is actually a pretty good article, not an article, like I suppose a document, where it gives us, for as far as the industry is considered, how we should be correctly installing windows and doors. And so I'll just quickly flick over a couple of little parts of it. So this is just your normal, just like your standards. It talks about the objectives, who they acknowledge and so on like that. But we're sort of more concerned, like we come down to here, show us the contents, and it talks a little bit about the building code and things like that. But then when we get to here, I'll make this fractionally bigger for you so it's all right on your screen, is we can start to talk about installing frames correctly. And then when we get to our flashings, and it's broken down into our general flashings, our jam and our head flashings, our sill, and then our aluminium windows, how we basically would do that on a brick veneer application, a cavity brick, timber frame, and then concrete blocks. Then the same sort of thing then on our aluminium doors, our timber window installation, and timber doors, then our UPVC window installation, and same with our doors. And then it talks a little bit about our post-installation care. So something that that you're not overly familiar with is flashing of your windows. This is really a great tool for that. And it's pretty easy. You can just look at some of the pictures. So this is pretty basic stuff too, but it starts to show you about when they actually get delivered on site, how we should be basically storing them and things like that, which is pretty self-explanatory. But I just want to scroll down to some pictures, and this one here even talks, if you're like a DBM and you're not too sure, how Windows get installed and so on, it actually starts to basically show you how we should be installing it, how we're checking it for plumb, how we're checking it for level, and it talks about, putting wedges in the side so that it actually stays plumb and level, and then it'll say somewhere about having a gap at the top, so we have a gap basically between the head of our window and then also where our lintel is, and it'll talk there also about basically the fixings that we should be using. And there's some stuff here talks about flashing, and I'm just going to quickly go over the different photos that it shows us because it'll make a bit more sense. So I think this one here is very similar to the ones that you guys have got in your book. I'll make that a little bit bigger. So it's basically showing us here that this is double masonry or full masonry, or what they call cavity masonry, and it's showing us here we've got our sill brick, and we've got a couple of different alternative positions on where we can actually put that sill flashing underneath, and then it's got our weep holes and so on. And then it does basically the same for above our windows, and then it gives us some alternatives down here for our weatherboards. So you probably heard me talk about it before, guys. I'm actually from Queensland, and pretty much everything I ever did was weatherboard, and these are some of the sort of different flashings we used to have to put in basically under our top weatherboard, sorry, under the lap of the weatherboard, and then come over our window so it didn't get in. And then some sill ones that you can see here as well. So and then it gives us some other ones showing us this is in our brick veneer applications. So it's obviously showing here this is our brick, this is our lintel, and this is, you know, internal linings with our lintel and so on like that, and then how that needs to be flashed. So we can see that obviously going up to our frame, coming down and then coming out there underneath our lintel so the water comes out. So you'll see there's different scenarios for it. There's probably a better close-up picture of how that sill flashing works, and then have the alternative where it actually sits under the sill brick. And I just want to show you too, there's some other ones here where it starts to show us about our aluminium windows when we're using our Caulfield blockwork. So on these ones here, this is your concrete block applications. So this is another thing too, which was quite big when I was in Queensland. I see it a little bit down here in Victoria, where people, you know, probably more for basements and stuff like that, where they use the concrete blocks and they Caulfield them. And it starts to show us here, you know, basically how you can get these sill blocks and how the windows are fitted in with our sealant and so on like that. And then you can have your sill tile. That's pretty common. I know you guys have seen that a fair bit. And then they have you know, some sort of lip here, I suppose, which yeah, basically the water doesn't get under our frame and then comes on our sill brick and then comes out. So there's a few different scenarios there, and then it goes on to our doors and so on. So I'm not going to read through that all with you or be here all night, but I will actually email that over, and I just sort of touch base on it because you guys get this picture here in hard copy, and that's sort of about it. But I think that's a pretty handy document. I said, especially if you're not physically installing Windows and you want to know a little bit about more how it needs to be done. All right, so from there, what I'm going to cover is I'm just going to go through the Australian standard and try and talk about a few things that I think we need to understand. A lot of us probably like the terminology that we use as well. Like I'm a shocker for calling stuff just what I call it on site. And then when I actually open up the standard, it's not called that. So, you know, when it's called brick veneer, I'm pretty sure in the standards referenced as single masonry. And then I've always called it, you know, like double brickwork. And then it says in here that it's called full masonry. So that's our two basically walls of brickwork with a cavity in the middle. So we want to sort of get familiar with the terminology. So that if we then are asked to do some sort of design and they say, you know, masonry veneer, that we know that they're talking about a timber frame with basically one skin of brickwork on the outside. And then a few other things I want to talk about are the different types of control joints. So I'll just work our way through here and tell you the parts that I think need to be highlighted. And but I also find too this standard, probably because it's not as big as the others, but I find it it's pretty easy to navigate through as well. You know, and if we don't have any bricklayers here, I can probably say this because they're only brickies. We wouldn't make it too big for them, or otherwise they wouldn't understand it. So yeah, so we'll go through here and I'll show you the parts that I've got highlighted. So just bear with me as I scroll through the pages, and you can probably hear my hard copy flicking over as I'm scrolling down because I've got my hard copy highlighted. So the first is on page 9, and when I get there, guys, I'll make it bigger so you guys can actually see it. So just to give us a little bit of an understanding, so if you've noticed with your brickwork, you know, we have what is our control joints. And so a lot of people might just call them contraction joints, or they might call them expansion joints or articulation joints. And a lot of people aren't aware that they're actually control joints, which is this one here, but there's actually 3 different types of control joints. So it says joints or gaps constructed in masonry to control and absorb movement in the masonry. Control joints include the following. So we've got contraction joints, and it says which open as the masonry contracts or shrinks. The other type we've got is the expansion joint, which closes as a masonry expands or as the associated concrete shrinks. And then articulation joints, which move to compensate for movement in the supporting structure. So it's probably not something you're going to be asked when you go in your interview, but I just think it's worthwhile getting familiar with it, because you might see a question that talks about a contraction joint and you're thinking, hang on, isn't that an articulation joint? So all 3 of those are actually control joints, and depending on what we're trying to control depends on which one we use. And so when I go through the standard, I will go into a little bit more detail about what they actually do. So, and when you see stuff like that, if you're ever reading something, any of your standards, and you're not too sure exactly, I actually don't know what that is, just come to the front of your standard and you'll see here where it's got definitions. So you go to your definitions page, or it'll be back in the table of contents, sorry, if you come back to here. and you'll see in here, basically under our section 1 is normally our definition. So if you're unsure of something and you go, geez, what's that? You go to your definition sections and it'll probably tell you what it is. So even when it gets to stuff like, I just saw one there, I might have said like single leaf masonry or something like that. So if there is any wording that you're not familiar with, go to your definitions as your first point of reference to try and understand it in case you're a bit stumped in your multiple choice or when you're getting your testing done. So just be aware too, we did cover this when we did our slabs and footings, that quite often if it's a symbol, that you'll see that it's in basically our definitions under symbols. So if it was a symbol that was, say, I don't know, I can't think of one off the top of my head, I think it was DS, which had to do with basically the depth of our pad footing, or that might have been DL when we did our Australian Standard 2870. If you looked under DL, you'd go, oh, it's not there. But when you scroll down further, you'll see there's a section in the definitions that relates to symbols, and then all those symbols and abbreviations are under that section. So that's a little bit on our control joints. And I'll just scroll down and I'll show you the parts I said which I think that we need to highlight. But we'll do a few little things too if you haven't done this exercise or this module before. Just trying to find some random things in the standard. And it's not, there's one in there that's got to do with something with the marine grade or something to do with anyway, being with something with marine. I've got the question here. Yeah, like the durability of the mortar, and it talks about a marine grade. Now, something like that, yeah, you're probably not going to be asked in your interview, but it's just things like that to try and get you used to being able to navigate through basically these standards and the codes that we use, because we can't always give you exactly what the VBA is giving you because they might change it tomorrow and you're going in. So you want to have that skill set on your own that you guys can actually find something that's not sort of being basically me showing you where it is in the standard. All right, so just bear with me and I'll find this next page that I need to get to so we can talk about it and highlight it. So this is something we did basically a couple of weeks ago. I'll just get down there. And I'm sure we've covered this enough before anyway, but it is actually in your standard. A few weeks ago, we actually spoke about where our vents need to be for our subfloor ventilation, and it's actually in here as well. So this is very similar to what's in our building code, and it tells us that in our brickwork, the vents, so I'll make that a little bit bigger for you, our vents need to be placed no more than 600 millimeters in from the corner. So actually just got that highlighted in my book. You might already have that highlighted in your building code. And then this here is basically showing us where our vents need to go as well. How it says an internal opening adjacent to the vent to be left open. So this has obviously got full masonry. And obviously if we had a vent there, but then we kept the masonry going, well, that vent really wouldn't be doing anything. It would just be basically venting the cavity, not actually the subfloor. So there is some pictures there which make it pretty easy to follow. And then back here, if you needed to have a little bit more reading up on it, it does talk about the ventilation in there. But we would have basically done a lot of that when we did our subfloors and highlighted our building code when we did that. And one thing we did do, which when I spoke to you when we did our subfloor ventilation, was about the different climate zones and the amount of square millimeters those vents need to be for every linear meter of wall there was. And so this was in our building code, but it's also, again, in your basically your standard for your masonry as well. If you're wondering how that works, it gives you a bit of a definition down here about the different zones that we use, and then those zones are basically related to back in this table. But yeah, very unlikely you'll be asked to, you might be asked, what the zones are, but you're not going to have to remember, how many square millimeters a certain vent is like we did in the class. All right, so this is one thing. I haven't had any feedback from any students that have gone through that have been asked this, but this was one thing that Steve, the training manager, basically used to just make sure the guys highlighted so if they were asked they could find it. And it's got to do with our engaged peers. So it says the main part there about here was this part here. So I'll just read through it. It says, when we're using engaged peers, the spacing of engaged peers shall be specified in the documents and when constructed shall not vary from the spacings by more than 20%, and the thickness of the engaged piers shall not be less than the greater of. So they shouldn't be any less than 100 millimeters, and that's including the 10 millimeters of mortar. So yeah, that was just one thing I think some guys were occasionally getting in a multiple choice. So I've just basically highlighted that. So if you guys got that question, no doubt you'd be able to look in your Australian Standard, find your section on engaged peers, and then hopefully that would then stick out to you because you've highlighted it. And this is, sorry, I did brush over this, but only because we covered it a few weeks ago. This is exactly what was out of our building code, showing us, basically our minimum height requirements, basically 150 down to our 400 over a 2 metre period. And then it shows us that obviously we've got our vent passing through there. All right, so, and it depends on how you actually like to find your stuff in your building code. I find personally in my standards and my building code that quite often I'm sort of more of a visual person, and so I actually highlighted this one here where it's showing our cavity. So this one here is showing we've got some sort of engaged pier, we've got our bearer sitting on it, then we've obviously got our joists, our flooring and our wall, and then it's got our cavity. So our cavity on that is a minimum of 25 millimetres. So we'll actually cover that a little bit later in the standard where it talks about what our minimum and maximums are. But I said I'm a visual person. If I'm flicking through something quickly and I see a picture and I know that's got a cavity on it, so I've actually just highlighted that in mine as well. Whether you choose to is up to you. But yeah, that's basically showing we've got a 25 minimum cavity there. I'll just scroll down to the next one we need to talk about. And if you're not familiar with this, guys, not stuff that some of this wouldn't be what you'd be asked, but it's really easy to navigate. This question here is, this section is showing us different ways to actually tie down onto our piers, basically with our bearers and so on. So it shows here we've got this this metal angle, and then we've got our bolts or whatever like we've got on these ones here coming down, how far down they've got to go, and then what size the actual bolts have to be themselves. So a little bit of information there on our anchoring. And so this here is the stuff that I wanted to sort of start explaining. So this is our control joint. So if you think back, 5 or 10 minutes ago when I showed us in the definitions and we spoke about our control joints, and we said how we had articulation joints, contraction joints, and expansion joints. It actually gives us a little bit of a definition here. So if you're wondering basically what they are, the articulation joint, it reduces cracking caused by the footing and other structural movements. That's what we use an articulation joint for. A contraction joint reduces cracking caused by contraction of the masonry units and concrete shrinkage in the supporting structure. And the expansion joint reduces cracking caused by expansion of masonry units, basically predominantly clay. So that's sort of telling us why we use those different ones. So a little bit of information there about our control joints. And then when we come down, this is the stuff where you sort of definitely need to know these answers. So this starts to talk about our articulation joints. And so I'm just trying to find it here for me. So this is what we're after here. This would be something you probably get in a multiple choice. So articulation joints shall be provided in unreinforced masonry walls longer than 5 metres. So it's basically longer than 5 metres. We need to have an articulation joint in. And so then when we scroll down that little bit, and it talks more here about how they're not required for Class A and Class S and things like that. So yeah, you can just read on that little bit further to actually see which sites we do and don't need them for. But yeah, basically 5 metres is a key that we're trying to highlight there. And then when we get down here to the letter F as well, this is a little bit more information on it, where it tells us that within 4 points, so this is still on our articulation joints, basically they need to be within 4.5 metres of all the corners, but no closer than 470 millimetres for cavity walls or 234 veneer walls. So that's a little bit, you might definitely want to highlight that. It might come up in your multiple choice. And depending on your license, if you were to basically, if you do have any bricklayers here, that might be stuff you would be asked and you'd need to know. So hopefully as a brickie you'd know that off the top of your head. But if not, and you've got a bit sort of cold feet and froze a bit in the interview, you could reference your standard and then find that. So then the next section of the book goes on to then our contraction joints. And pretty much these are going to be exactly the same as the past measurements that we spoke about. So under here, under our Roman numerals number 7, it basically tells us the same thing. So for our contraction joints, same thing, within 4.5 metres of all the corners, but no closer than 470 millimetres for cavity walls or 230 for our veneer walls. And then the next section, so this is a bit of a table here, but don't worry too much about that. We don't seem to be getting guys quizzed on that, but you'd find that easily enough. That's for basically spacing of contraction joints for unreinforced masonry walls, and it's got a bit of information on there depending on the height and things like that. So the other one which we get quite often in your multiple choice is same measurements again. So this time we're talking about our expansion joints. So as you can see, whichever control joint we're using, they're the same measurements anyway. So within 4.5 meters of all corners, but no closer than 470 mil for cavity walls or 230 millimeters for your veneer walls. So yeah, I'd basically highlight those ones. I said, but once you know those figures, they're going to be exactly the same for all the type of control joints that we use anyway. So bear with me a second. If you're not too sure how it all works, as you can read through this in your own time if you're that way inclined. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on. Next year, lintel, and we'll talk about the bearing. So basically how far that has to sort of be, I suppose, supported, and shows our control joints, in different ways of actually doing our control joint, obviously up the side of the window, and then or beside the lintel and so on. So if you're wondering why you might be seeing stuff on different sites, the way they're doing these control joints, basically in here is going to specify the way that they can be done around our windows. So here's another one just there. Down here, sorry, just scrolling, there's a bit of information, basically showing us on there, basically the different, whether we're using a backing rod, whether you're using expanding or compressible materials and so on. So these, basically a bit of information in there for guys who need to install those, but nothing you would be quizzed on. And so then when we get to here, this is sort of showing us, if we look at the picture here, basically this is talking about our steel lintels. And down here, same thing, nothing you'd be asked about in your, basically in your interview, but I had some brickies in my face-to-face class who were trying to work this out because, probably like us as chippies, we just normally rock up on site and someone's designed it and the timber's there and we've got to basically just build it. And they were the same with all the lintels they install. They just rock up and they know which one goes where and they put it in. But if you wanted to know, basically this here basically determines, basically the load type on the lintel, and then a bit of a description. That's how you can determine, what size lintel that you need to use. And then it just shows us sort of a few different scenarios here where we've got, a timber frame with our brick veneer, with our brick on the outside. Then it's showing obviously we need the double lintels for the double brickwork. There's like a single skin there, which is type B, and it goes through our different types of scenarios in there. So not something to be quizzed on, but if you want to know a little bit more about determining the load width, then you can go through this section here, and just like we did with our standards and work out what size bearer do I need, then we can use that standard to work out basically what size lintel we've got, and that's what I've got down to here. So we determine, the load type, is it A, B, C, or D, or E, and then, what type of roof have we got, and then basically how big the masonry is and how big the opening is and stuff like that, and it tells us the size of the basically steel lintel that we need to use. But for this exercise, nothing that you need to sort of be too concerned about, but it's pretty easy to find through if you want to have a read on it. All right, so some terminology that we might not actually be familiar with is on here when it says the bearing length. So if you got asked, what is the bearing length of the lintel, as it's just basically asking us how much of that lintel needs to be supported. So when you look on here, it's showing us that's our opening, that's our lintel, and it's supported on the brickwork. And then it also shows us down here that the maximum that brick can obviously overhang our lintel is 25 millimeters, and we've got to have our mortar packing down the end here. So I'm just trying to see, so when you're talking about the minimum bearing length, it'll be up in this table here. So depending on the size of the opening, depends on, if it's up to 1 meters, then it's 100 mil either side, and basically if it's over 1 meter opening, then this bearing length has to be 150 millimeters. And just remember, this is always a minimum. Just like everything we've been doing so far, it's the minimum. So if you go that bit extra, not an issue, but it can't be any less than that. So that's a bit of information there about your bearing lengths for your different types of lintels. And then, so as I said at the beginning of the presentation, how I get caught out all the time using the wrong terminology. And this is where we start to talk about our masonry veneer walls. And so it tells us a masonry veneer wall consists of non-structural masonry leaf supported by a structural load-bearing frame, and it's separated by a cavity. So a lot of us probably call that our brick veneer. And that's when we get a bit of information down here where it says, and it said you can highlight this because it's something you'll definitely have to know in a multiple choice. We did highlight it before on that picture, but it does say for the cavity, the minimum clear width of any cavity in masonry veneer construction shall be 25 millimetres and shall be measured clear from any conduit, insulation and services placed within that cavity. So that's one question that you're definitely going to want to know. And then when we get down to the next page on page 49, as we start then to talk about our damp-proof coursing. So you'll see damp-proof coursing is actually abbreviated to DPCs. So quite often people go, geez, what's DPC? And same thing, if you weren't too sure, you'd be able to go to definitions and find it. But yeah, if you're not familiar, DPC in the standard is going to be damp-proof coursing. So for this next part of the standard, we're going to go through our damp-proof coursing, our flashings and our weep holes. So it does tell us down here that it needs to be visible. This is our damp proofing. It needs to be visible at the face of the wall, including after rendering or any other applied coatings. And the height of the damp coursing shall not be less. So these are the measurements you want to know. So the damp proof coursing basically can't be less than 150 millimetres above the adjacent finished ground level, 75 millimetres above finished paved or concrete or landscaped areas that slope away, or 50 millimetres above finished paved concrete or landscape areas that slope away from the wall and are protected from direct effect by weather by way of a carport, a veranda or the like. And that's something that does basically not always happen. One of the guys in my face-to-face class, he was telling me that, I can't remember how it basically worked, but something happened in an insurance company wouldn't actually insure this house because the concrete had come round and put paths all around the outside of the building and actually made them too high and didn't actually comply with this part here. And so therefore it wouldn't be insured, and the concrete had to basically come back up and pull up all this concrete and then redo it so that it actually met these requirements. And there's a lady who works for a volume builder. I can't think of their name off the top of my head, but she was telling me she's sort of in the office there and does all the contract signing, and they've got basically something going through VCAT at the moment where it had to do with the height of the weep holes. And she told me this probably 7 or 8 months ago, so I can't remember the exact story, but basically got signed off by their building surveyor, but the client had actually engaged their own private surveyor. So this was back when the builder could choose a surveyor. So whoever the volume builder was said, yeah, well, this is a surveyor that we use, and they were just probably going through doing their sort of due diligence, but just ticking and flicking, I suppose. And then the clients got their own private surveyor to come out and basically said, no, this doesn't meet the building code, and actually highlighted this clause and said that your weep holes are basically at the wrong height. And so they've disputed it, and so here's this, they're waiting to go to VCAT, and so they haven't got their final progress payment. But also too, if they're deemed that they've got to actually fix it, I'm no brickie, but I would see that being a pretty hard job to do when you've already got your damp-proof coursing that's fixed to your frame and then sitting in your mortar. If that's at the wrong height, how you go about pulling all those bricks out and not destroying the wall and everything else that's basically sort of built into that to try and get that weep holes and the flashing at the actual right height it should be. So just be aware of a few things like that as well. Probably something you might get in a multiple choice. And then down here, something you want to highlight also, it talks about the laps in our damp proofing. So if we're going to lap our damp proof coursing, basically they need to be 150 millimetres if we're doing a straight run, and then if it's going to be at a corner, it needs to be basically the whole width of the damp proof at the corner. And we'll probably see some pictures of that coming up shortly. So then on the next page, same thing, it talks here then about our flashing and our weep holes. And we just really want to understand these measurements. And we'll do these, you'll understand this a bit later on too when we do our drawings if you haven't done them before. And it talks about our cavity flashing. And basically it needs to be turned up a minimum 150 millimetres on the inner frame, and then fixed to the inner frame at 600 centres. That's the maximum we can do it. And the lap joints basically in our flashing need to be, just like our damp-proof coursing, basically 150 millimetres in a straight run, and if lapped at the corners by the width of the leaf and the cavity in accordance with figure 9.1. So you probably want to highlight those, and then the other little part you want to highlight is then basically the spacing of our weep holes. So down here it just says, if I can highlight it, no, it's not going to work for me. That part there where veneer walls shall be drained by weep holes at 1200 millimetre maximum centres. So every 1200 we've got to put some weep holes in. So if you're wondering how that sort of damp proofing and so on worked, here's basically showing us the damp proofing and how it needs to go over the corner. And you can see there that the way they've cut it, basically it does lap that whole corner of the brickwork. So that's basically showing our external flashing lap. And I'll just move on to these next parts. So then it talks about how far we've got to embed these corner flashings. So this is talking about our sill flashings, and that's just another picture there showing around the external corner. But when we move on to our sill flashings, what we want to be, the measurements we want to know here, we might be asked in our interviews or in our multiple choice is, sorry, this one here. So sill flashings shall be built in below exposed masonry sills, as shown in figure 9.3, and shall be embedded not less than 30 millimetres into the masonry and extend 150 millimetre beyond the reveals on each side of the opening. And then it does say a few things here where it says sill flashings shall be either built in directly below the sill brick or built in one course below the sill brick. And that's what we saw on this picture. I'll just make that a little bit bigger for you. How it basically gave us the two options here, where it can actually come under the sill brick or it can come under the brick here and have the weep holes on it. But then when we read a little bit further, it does say that weep holes may be omitted from our sill flashings. So, yeah, I don't know, to me it doesn't make sense to have the sill flashing there if it's just going to come straight out the side. But obviously what it does do, if I can bring up the picture, and obviously if the water does get in there, it just spills over the side of that flashing anyway, goes down our cavity, and then basically out our bottom, flashing out through our weep holes. So that's a little bit of information there that you just want to obviously know how far it needs to be embedded and how far it needs to extend. And it does actually give us also some pictures over here. And I might just read on a little bit before I come back to that, because this talks about the location of sill and head flashings. And I'll read through this and then I'll come back to these pictures here. So basically what we want to know with our head flashings, shall be installed over exposed openings in veneer walls as shown in figure 9.3, which is this picture here above us. And we want to be familiar with these measurements, guys. So it needs to extend, like before, 150 millimetres beyond each side of the opening. And then on this one here, be built into the masonry a minimum of 30 millimetres and turned up the cavity no less than 150 mil. And then down the bottom, be drained by weep holes at 1200 millimetre centres for openings greater than 1200 millimetres. So it does talk about, do we need, like the weep holes and so on above the top here. And there's different formulas. So it just says flashings may be omitted where the opening is protected by a veranda, eave or the like. And the head flashing may be omitted where A is less than 3 times of B. So we're not going to go into this tonight because we're not sort of asked in this much detail when you go into the VBA, but you just got to work out your measurements, know how big the opening is, and then you look at it here and it says, okay, well, this is what A is, this is what B is, use the formula down the bottom. And that's why sometimes if you're doing stuff on site and you go, geez, why is there no weep holes here? It might have something to do with basically using these formulas underneath here. All right, so let's scroll on to the next part that we want to talk about. So we want to know a little bit about our wall ties. So this is now on page 56. I'll just get down there. So with our wall ties, basically talks about ties should be placed in such a manner that they're within. It talks about the distance within our control joints, basically from the ends and the top of the walls. And then the big one that we get in, if you're doing your multiple choice, you're probably seeing already, is that one there. In all cases, the maximum vertical and horizontal spacing shall not exceed 600 millimetres. So a bit of information there on wall ties, and that's the most common one guys get is the 600 millimetres. And then when we come down to this next table, it shows us here basically the duty ratings for type A veneer ties. And so, same thing, and nothing that you'd be asked in your interview, but some guys have asked me that in the past. It's just like using our span tables we did with our 1684. What's the horizontal spacing? What's the wind rating that we're using? And then what is the wall type? And then, from there we can determine, what type of wall type we need. Do we need light duty, medium duty, or heavy duty? And that's how we can determine, basically how strong that wall tie is going to be. But what we also need to understand is this part here, the ties need to be embedded at least 50 millimeters into the masonry leaf. So obviously if it's only in there 10 millimeters, it's not going to be in far enough. Just like when we're fixing a wall frame and we had our nominal fixings and it spoke about how big the nails had to be for certain size top plates to go into the stud. It's no different for our wall tiles. They've got to be embedded into the masonry leaf, at least 50 millimeters. So we're going to scroll on past these next couple of pages. So I've got a question here from Tom. Just give me a second there, Tom. I'll just read it. Yeah, so this is a question Tom's just asked me. He says, why would the damp proofing at the bottom of the weep holes have to extend through the entire brickwork, and the head flashings only have to be 30 millimeters? Mate, to be totally honest with you, I'm not too sure why that is, because as long as it's basically in the brickwork, it's going to run out through your weep holes anyway. I was wondering if it's got to do with being able to inspect it. And that's why, because it says that it needs to be visible even when it's being rendered. So I don't know if it's for the visibility for inspection reasons for some reason. Maybe that's why it's there, but I'm not 100% sure. That's the only reason I can think of it to say that's actually there. But I honestly, other than that, I don't know. If anyone else knows why you would have to basically have extend all the way through, by all means, let me know. No, Jeff said good question. He was thinking exactly the same thing. And I have been asked that before. And that's the only thing I can come up with, that it needs to be basically be visually seen. And some of the, so I don't know if that's for, as I said, inspection purposes later on. But even the brickies were telling me that I've got in my face-to-face class that quite often that their clients will say, oh, listen, I actually don't want to see that. Can you just make sure that actually gets rendered over? And so they're like, oh, well, we're not actually allowed to do that. And they go, oh, doesn't matter, it's my house, that's how I want it. And so that's another thing too, just be wary of things like that, that us as tradespeople and builders we can't actually build it so it's not compliant. So even though if it extended all the way through, okay, yeah, that's a good one too. That might be to do with it as well. Greg's got in there saying, that the damp course is about your damp rising, and the flashing's obviously about the water coming out. So might have to do with obviously the rising. Maybe that's a good point, Greg. Maybe so they actually can't rise through. That's probably why it is. Yep. Yeah, because as you see, as Greg said, even though quite often we use our damp coursing as a flashing, it's probably more from coming up underneath. I hadn't thought of it that way. But just be aware that if someone did ask you to render over it, that that you can't. You don't want to go, okay, the client's asked for that, because I've heard of stories in the past where clients have asked stuff and then it's failed or something's gone wrong, and basically when they've got, they haven't built it to Australian standard and they've had to basically come and fix it. So just be mindful of that too, guys. When I was back in Queensland, I had a mate who, sort of a mate of a mate, sounds like it's me when I say it was a mate of a mate, but basically with the decking board, the client had actually asked them, would they turn it upside down? And they wanted, they thought that the underside of the actual the decking board acted like it's a bit of a non-slip. So the guy said, look, that's not the way it's installed, blah, blah, blah. He said, no, that's the way I want it. So he's basically installed it that way, and then something happened, and I forget what happened. Basically, after that was client requested, that guy had to come up and basically pull up all the decking boards and basically turn them over and nail them the right way. And as you can imagine, how much of a pain in the ass that would be, and then also to the damage you do to the decking boards trying to pull them all up. So just be mindful of things like that, that we have to basically install it as per the Australian standards. All right, so this next section here talks about our cavity masonry walls. It's the same thing again. A lot of us might not call it cavity masonry, so I will try tonight to call it cavity masonry. But it tells us a cavity masonry wall consists of 2 leaves of masonry separated by a cavity. So a lot of this stuff is going to be very similar with our measurements. Probably the only thing that changes a little bit, and you probably want to highlight this, is actually the size of our cavity. So down here, basically the cavity width shall be a minimum of 35 millimeters and a maximum cavity width of 75 mil. And that's clear of our conduit, just like it was with our single masonry. And then once, and I don't know if you want to highlight these, I don't think it hurts to actually highlight it in case you're looking for something in basically cavity masonry, even though the measurements are exactly the same as what we did before. But same thing here, it's got these measurements again, saying that our damp-proof coursing has to be visible, and at 150 mil, our 75 above our finished pave, or 75 basically if it's covered by a carport and so on. So those measurements are exactly the same, but I think it's worth actually highlighting. And then when we turn over to the next page, exactly the same thing about our damp-proof coursing, basically how it's got to be lapped in 150 mil and needs to be the width of the damp course at the corners. And you can see here some pictures. If you're not familiar with it, guys, there's some pictures here showing us basically how it gets done in our, so basically, yeah, you can see there some stuff in there, and there's that other one we had as well. So there's some pictures in there as well that shows us how the cavity flashings can basically be done. And then when we come over, really the same stuff, talking about our weep holes again, you know, that are basically 30 millimeters in the outer leaf, need to go 150 millimeters basically either side of the opening. And it tells us again that weep holes may be emitted from our sill flashings. And then once we come over, it actually gives us a few pictures. And then these are obviously, because it's our full masonry, we've got obviously the 2 lintels and so on like that. So that's showing us, you know, it needs to go up 150 millimeters and then basically come out through our steel lintel. And that's this, yeah, basically then talking about head flashings. The same thing again, talks about 150 mil either side of the opening, how far it needs to be embedded and then turned up, and then drained by, weep holes basically every 1200 millimeters. So yeah, it is the same. So whether you guys want to highlight it, I just think it's worth highlighting. So whichever the section of the book you're in, you can actually find it. So bear with me one sec. I think that's all I sort of had highlighted in my book. So you can hear me flicking over my pages. Because you'll notice, yeah, normally with my PDFs I've got them highlighted, but this one I haven't. So yeah, they're sort of things that I sort of, yeah, get guys to highlight and then understand. So from here, what I thought we would do is maybe just as a bit of a refresher also for the guys, because really the 2 exercises we are going to do from here is, oh, sorry, let me open that up so I get the correct one, is do this exercise here. So that one's probably going to take the longest. And as for you guys who have done the course before, probably you won't get any difference out of that one there. So what we might do is this one here to start with, and just a bit of basically missing detail. So let me just shrink that a little bit. You'll have that in your folder, and it tells us that it's fill in the missing detail for articulated masonry veneer. So what we can obviously see, we want to put in where the eaves are, and then basically draw in where our flashing is, nominate how high up it needs to come, how that actually comes out. And because it's basically a class M, if you guys have done this before, maybe just choose a different class and make it a H1 or something. And if you wanted to then have a little bit of practice on basically what your footing is going to be, you can see there that it's our double masonry. So then you can determine how deep that needs to be, our width, and then what steel needs to go in it. And then basically how big our cavity needs to be, and basically anything there that you think's missing. So we'll do that one now. It might take us 15 minutes. We'll probably go through it, maybe then have a little bit of a break and then come back and finish that second exercise. So yeah, for those guys who are doing it for the first time, definitely do it as a class M. And the guys who have done it before, why don't we use a class H1, and we'll see what we come up with. And so yeah, we'll do that. Once you're basically done, type it in the box and say you're done, and we'll go through the answers, have a bit of a break, and then go back onto that second exercise. So do a H1, and I'll try and figure out what those answers are while you guys are doing it as well, so I can at least compare my answers for a H1. So any questions in the meantime, just either type in the box or ask me, but you'll be sitting here trying to work out the H1 scenario. I'll just be offline for about 30 seconds, guys. I'm just going to go and actually grab my Australian Standard 2870. So if you're asking to me and go, where'd you go? Just give me 60 seconds and I'll be back. All right, guys, I'm back if you've got any questions. So just remember, guys, to let me know when you've done this. I think, Jake, you might be the only guy who's got to do the whole thing. So just let me know, Jake, when you're done. I might just type in the box that you're done, and yeah, we can sort of go through what the details should be in there. But yeah, don't feel rushed at all. Cool, thanks, Jake. All right, so give me 1 second, I'll go through this. All right, so unfortunately I actually don't have a CAD drawing of this, but I'll be able to bring up a few things that we, from our other pictures on here. So just starting at the top, I suppose it doesn't say this, but yeah, we're going to have basically an eave in here, because obviously the brickwork would go all the way to the top, so we want to obviously draw in how we would basically box in our eaves with the eave sheeting. So this depends on how much to town you went on the drawing. So basically, if you went to town on it, you would have obviously drawn in a top plate and basically your timber lintel. Then from there, we would have had our steel lintel drawn in here with showing our basically our flashing, how that basically channels the water out and goes up 150 millimeters up the frame. Then down the bottom here, so as far as basically our strip footing went, I've got here that it's this is on the Class M. Basically 450 deep by 300 wide, basically using our 3L11 trench mesh top and bottom. An ant cap on here. Now, it depends to you guys how people, how you sort of work out, I suppose, if you do a lot of stuff here on your engaged piers, some guys draw in their bit of Malfoy and things like that. So, but I'm just sort of more going off how the standards have it and how we can reference it. Basically, our heights are basically over our 2 meters, 150 mil back to 400. Our cavity, the minimum of that, what was I think it was 25. I should know off the top of my head. 25 millimeters is basically the minimum of our cavity. And with me, I always put double joists underneath my load-bearing walls. I've got that drawn in there, and I think that's it. I probably missed something there without having a drawing because I was just sort of going off the top of my head where it would go. But that's pretty much what we should have had there. The guys who if you wanted to work out that strip footing, just look at my book then. I think it was 600 deep, 300 wide with 3 N16 steel in it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I just quickly referenced my book, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was because it said it was basically articulated masonry veneer on a H1, I think is what I said before we did it. So, so with those pictures, as if you were wondering if I did miss something you thought or if you did something a little bit differently, that's another one too, Greg. Yeah, so whilst it's hard to draw it, definitely reference in there basically your weep holes and your brick ties. So, basically where they would be, and probably could even put in here where our subfloor ventilation would be as well. So I know it's hard to actually draw it on here when it's not very big, but you could draw in obviously your brick ties as well, and then reference that basically no bigger than no further apart than 600 by 600 and things like that. And my advice would be, if you get drawings like this, we always say go and fill out as much as you can, but then they're big on having stuff referenced as well. So my advice would be go in and draw as much as you can, because you don't want to be trying to reference everything and you only get half of it completed. But basically fill it in and then go back and reference, wall ties at 600, no further than 600 vertical or horizontal spacings as per whatever section that was in your Australian standard. And so so when Greg said there, based on the module reference the weep holes and the brick ties, when you do reference it, I'd actually be putting the clause next to it as well. And then that way, if there's any sort of thing that they want to double check, it shows that you actually know where it came from. And I find sometimes too, it can sort of act on your behalf. If you actually put a measurement wrong there by 10 mil and it was just like a typo, but you had the right clause, it's only going to be beneficial that they might look lightly on that. And as I said to you guys last week, one of the guys who I trained face-to-face, I think I told you this, he went in, he got 90-something% in his multiple choice, but in his basically like the plan side of it, he only got 67%. But they still put him through anyway. And I'm only they didn't say why they did, but I reckon he said he didn't get he basically didn't get it all completed. And I reckon they looked at it and went, well, geez, whilst he only got 67%, he probably only completed 80% of it. So what he completed was actually pretty spot on. And so I think if you're referencing it, shows that you're can only act in your favour, but you always want to get it done first. And then if you once you get it done, then go and reference as much as you can, and it shows that you know where it comes from. So what I might do, guys, rather than get started on this and then have a break, because this will probably be the second part that we'll finish off tonight. It'll probably take us through to about 8 o'clock, probably a little bit after. Is going to be this this exercise here. And so what we'll do, we normally have a 15-minute break if it's your first session on. That gives guys time to have a little bite to eat, go and have a ciggy or whatever they want to do. So yeah, we'll come back at 7:25, and then we'll go over this exercise here. So yeah, have a break and I'll catch us in 15 minutes. All right, guys, welcome back. I just had a question from Jeff about the H1 footing type, and I think I made one of a boo-boo there, Jeff. That's probably why he asked me to redo it. Unfortunately, I normally do make a boo-boo when I sort of make something up on the spot as well, because quite often guys are typing to me and I'm going back and forth finding stuff. So, yeah, what it should have been, just looking at it now a bit more closely. So I'm on page 38 of my Australian Standard 2870, and because we're doing a strip footing. And our table there, I've gone into H1, and it says, I think from the picture, let me bring it up, that it's articulated masonry veneer, which tells us there. So it should be 600 deep, which I think I said, 300 wide, which I think I said, but I think I gave you the wrong steel. So the steel should be 3L 12M, whereas I think I might have said 3N16. So hopefully, Jeff, that might be what you're referring to, because I think I might have said the wrong steel. But yeah, basically the 3LTM is 12TM is what I'm looking at now. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So if still not, let me know and we'll talk about it. So basically what we're going to do from here, guys, is let's go on to this exercise. And this is sort of the main stuff that we want to get out of tonight, and this can be you just referencing your standard. So this is basically giving us our picture. Now, it depends on probably who you've done this with previously. Yeah, no worries, Jeff. I said I do that occasionally. Sorry. Yeah, so basically just go through and find these questions. So it tells us that the site class is H2, and we want to find out what is the bearing requirements for the lintel. So we'll go back to our Australian standard, basically look at how wide that window the opening is, and then work out the bearing requirements of how much of that lintel needs to sit on either side. And then, what is the maximum spacing for the articulation joints? And basically just work your way through. I don't think that a couple as you get down might become a little bit challenging, just for the fact that they're sort of well hidden within the Australian standard there. And that'll be some of the questions there. What type of wall ties, and so question 19 and 20. So basically go through and basically do your best. And also 17, what is the maximum water pressure used to clean brickwork? And it's funny, last time I trained this, the bricklayers in my class had that actually referenced, I don't know, it was something from the builder they'd used. Maybe they were sent some details about it in their specifications. It actually said, in the pressure cleaner must be no larger than basically what it said their maximum KPA, and it was bigger than what the standard actually allowed. So that was sort of a bit odd as well. They were using something that was stronger than what the Australian standard allowed. So basically go along and have a crack at those and see how you go. And then also don't forget, we can do this part here. It's very similar to what we just did previously, but work out there. We've got a site class which is a H2. So then work out. We can see that's a raft slab. So work out same thing in what our slab should be. So have a crack at that one there. And I think basically Jake's the only one who's got to do this from scratch from the beginning. But if you other guys want to go through and make sure you can find them again, by all means do it. But yeah, Jake, if you can let me know when you're done, mate, so then you're not sitting here waiting for me for half an hour to sort of move on to the next part. So if you've got any questions in the meantime, I'll be sitting here anyway, so ask me, and otherwise have a crack at that and see how you go. Sorry guys, I was chatting there with my with my button on mute. So yeah, so Jake's finished, and I think he was the only one who actually had to basically complete the whole thing. So if someone else was there, you might have joined a little bit late. If you haven't done this before and you need to basically complete it, just type in the box, can I have another minute or two, or however long you need, and we'll wait. If not, if everyone's sort of right to go on, we'll go over that and sort of just explain, what the answers were and why we actually got those answers. So if you do need a minute, just type it in the box and we'll wait. If not, I'll move on to the answers. And that looks like we're all good to actually cruise on. All right, so I do actually have an answer sheet for this. Let me just bring it up. One second just to get it from my folder. I just find it a bit confusing with the answers. I've just handwritten mine in there, so give me a second and I will email this out in case anybody wants it. So all it is, just got basically the answers down the bottom, and yeah, a few of them are just referenced where it came from, whereas I'll just basically read through them because my answers are the same. I just find it a little bit easier to read my notes rather than Steve's. So there's obviously the drawing that we were doing. So what is the bearing requirements for the lintel? So that's obviously how much does it need to be supported on each side of the brickwork, and so that should have been 150 millimetres. The next question there was what is the maximum spacing for the articulation joints with external face finished masonry? And I've got from page 33 that it says there should be 10 millimetre joints basically at 5 metres. Question 3, what is the weep hole requirements for the bottom of the brickwork? So 1200 millimetres, that came from page 50 in our Australian standards. Then number 4, what is the weep hole requirements for the bottom of the window? So when we actually, if I bring up my Australian standard, it did actually say there that they could be omitted, but depending on how you actually interpreted that question, I'll just bring up what it actually showed you there. So give me a second. So this came from page 52, and this is I've gone one too far. Yep. So this is so we're on the right page. Yep. So this is talking about our sill flashings. So for the bottom of the window, and it does say here that they can actually be omitted, or you might have gone basically with one of these ones here where it says building directly below the sill brick or building one course below the sill brick, which was basically these examples here that we showed a little bit earlier. So then the next question, will you need weep holes over the window if there's no eave? And I've got written yes, but I suppose that's another one too. It determines on how you would have basically interpreted that question, and I suppose the drawing. So Steve's got here, this depends on if you have an eave and basically then using that against the formula. Because as you can see here, it actually doesn't really show us how it goes above there. So I've just, I've said yes, but I said, you could argue the case and say, well, hang on, Adam, if we use that formula, if I come to whatever it was, we'll just go over that again. I know Steve hasn't got the date. Give me a second and I'll find it in when we get this formula here. So depending on our formulas, then we spoke about, basically A and then B being basically no more than 3 times of what, B being basically not less, head flashings may be omitted where A is not less than 3 times of B. So depending on how you interpreted that, you could have actually gone and used that formula, but there wasn't really enough information in the drawing to get that. So I've just said, that we do need basically weep holes over our window. So then the next one, sorry, just let me find the sheet again. So then the maximum spacing for brick ties, both horizontal and vertical, 600 by 600, and that came from page 56. What is the brick tie requirements at the articulation joint? So that would have been our the distance, basically 300 millimetres, and that was on page 56. The minimum cavity for basically the brick veneer is 25 millimetres, and the maximum cavity for brick veneer, actually that should probably be the maximum cavity for the brick veneer. I've got here 75 mil. So let me just have a look, but I've got a little asterisk next to that. I might have been going to talk about both of them. So what I will talk about both of them, obviously one of them, when it says that the masonry from memory, when we're doing a brick veneer, it doesn't actually say like it does. Actually, let's bring it up. It'll be easy for me to show you guys than to try and do it from memory, because that's normally when I stuff it up. So if we come to, and I've got my page number here, page 75. Actually, we'll go to page 48 first. So this talks about our cavity. So this one here is for our masonry veneer walls. So it does say the minimum clear width of any cavity is 25 millimeters. And it doesn't actually, it says the maximum cavity width is limited by the rating of the wall tile as indicated on the package. So basically we would have known that when we actually, if you read it, that our brick ties have to be embedded a certain distance into our brickwork, and that for them will determine basically what the maximum in the cavity will be, because we can't obviously only have the brick tie sitting in a little bit. So that's when it gets to, you know, what is the maximum cavity for a brick veneer. We actually have to work out our wall tie and then so on. But if you did it on basically your double masonry, then yeah, I can find that for you. But if, let me have a look here. It's going to be down a couple of pages. Let me have a look here. So if you were then doing like masonry walls, that's when it talks about here that it's got standard measurements, basically 35 minimum and 75 maximum. So just remember, when you're doing a brick veneer, it's got to do with basically how far that brick tie is embedded, and then yeah, basically depending on the size of the tie, we can then have a bigger basically cavity, just no less than what that 25 is, because it's our minimum. So then back to, sorry, I've got so many screens open, you guys probably can't see it because so many documents open. It's a bit hard for me to find what I'm trying to open up. So the minimum lap of the damp-proof coursing in a straight line was 150 mil, and that came from page 49. So then number 11, if double brick, what would be the minimum embedment of damp-proof coursing into the inner leaf? 30 millimeters, that came from page 64. Does the damp-proof coursing have to be visible? Yes, at the face of the wall. That's on page 61. And then 13 says, what are the requirements for damp-proof coursing if the wall is rendered? So as above, it's still got to be visible at the face of the wall. The minimum height of the damp-proof coursing above the finished ground level. So these were those different measurements that we had. If I go to page 61 in our standard, where we had our 150, our 75 and our 50, and basically that was in relation to, you know, down here, you know, whether we had paved, you know, whether it was protected by a carport and so on. So there's our numbers for that. The minimum embedment of a brick tie into the mortar is 50 millimeters, so that came from page 57. So what is the maximum water pressure used to clean brickwork? That was 7,000 kPa, and that came from page 89. And if this was a Class A site, would you need articulation joints? The answer on that one was no, from page 32 in your Australian Standard. And then wall ties should be of what type and complying with what Australian Standard? So it should be type A, and the Australian Standard is Australian Standard 99.1, and that was on page 21. And then the mortar durability class in a marine environment must be of M3. So that was page 16. So a lot of guys struggle with that last one. So if you've got that Jake and your other guys doing it, they did pretty well. A lot of guys struggle with number 20. And then some things which guys forget to do when they do this question is, let me bring it up again, is basically this section here. So we did one very similar. I'm not too concerned if you don't draw it in again, but just be aware, you know, things that we want to draw in is like, you know, the height of our flashings, you know, basically a damp-proof coursing underneath. Basically, if you were, you know, referencing this for an exam when you went in, you know, as Greg told us before, basically type in there, not type right in there, you know, what your basically your weep hole should be at, draw in a couple of brick ties, and then maybe reference, you know, basically what their spacing should be. And obviously what else, like the cavity, and then also you want to fill in the basically the missing documents on the documents, missing basically computations on our raft slab here. So I've got that it should be 600 mil deep, basically what's that, 300 wide. Our trench mesh is going to be 3L12M, and I've got a feeling that we need maybe some bars at the top as well. So So this is, let me check my standard, because otherwise I'll mess it up like I did before. So let's have a quick look. So if we go to our RAS slab in our Australian standard 2870, and what we've got a H2, yeah, we probably would have, because that's obviously H2 is pretty full on, and it's got articulation joints in it. Yep, top bar reinforcing of yeah, basically 2N12. So sorry, H2. Yep, 2N12 bars. There we go. So yeah, that's we should have that in there as well. So that's basically what we would have got, you know, if you filled that in. And I don't know if I missed anything else off there. But as I said, guys, I thought this would only take till about 8 o'clock tonight. And I said I do normally say to the guys, okay, let's now start practicing those tests. Is anyone here who's basically completed the course and waiting for their interview date or their multiple choice actually not got a log on to our multiple choice? If you go and just, what is your multiple choice, Adam? Let me know and I'll bring it up on the screen and show it to you, and I'll try and organise basically a log on for you. So is there anyone who's waiting for that, or you've all got it? Probably other than Jake, because Jake hasn't finished the course yet. But anyone else needing that? Yeah, you can get a log on, Ben. No worries. Also, have you actually seen it, Ben, and how it looks? No, Jeff's got it. Yep. No, you haven't. Okay. So what? Because from memory, Ben, you're doing the basically the non-habitable structures, aren't you? Is that right? Yep. Cool. So what I'll do, I'll just show it to you, and now because when you, oh, that's not real handy. When you go in, Ben, you'll find that you'll just go straight into an interview. But I think this is a good way, even for the guys, because this is going to be based at a DB, basically the DBU level, also the guys going for DBM or their carpentry license. And so don't be disheartened by basically a lot of it if you don't know it, because you won't be tested on it. But I've found the guys who are going for those limited license still like to do it just to sort of test their knowledge, because they've done the whole course anyway, and then they can just test their knowledge, and especially the stuff, they'll know the ones that they should know. So when they get questions on contracts, you know, permits and stuff like that, that's across every license. So it's a good way to actually practice those as well. So I'll show you how it looks, and I'll organise a log-on for you. So if I go to builder registration, take the full test here, and what they'll do, they'll give you a log-on, and I've got mine saved in here. And so you can obviously save yours, and then you go log me in. Now mine's a little bit different. If you're looking at this, guys, and go, hey, mine's not like that, don't stress over it, because I'm actually on as an administrator, so I've got to do a couple of extra steps to get on there. Like this is one of them here, whereas you guys just go straight to the test when you log on. So I'll come back to here. And so here's the test, Ben. So the way it works, and this is very similar to how when the guys go and actually sit their multiple choice. So there are actually 6 tests. And then there's one for guys who are doing swimming pools, one for commercial on the technical side, and then one for commercial on the business side. So if you're just going for a limited license, you'll be looking at doing tests 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And it's basically come on. And what we've tried to do is make it realistic, because when you go in, you've only got an hour to basically do the test. So there is actually a timer there that once you start, the clock starts to actually count down. But what's different between this one and the one at the VBA is if you get, it tells you straight away whether you get it wrong or right. So then, yeah, obviously the VBA, you don't know until they send you your results. So that's probably the beauty of doing this as well. So it says on here, you know, what height can you build a scaffold without a ticket? And so you pick your answer, and once you click it, you go check, and it tells you whether you're correct or not. And then you go to the next one. So what is a Form 2? And so that will be something, you know, that hopefully across our different licenses, you know, we would know that. And if not, you can reference your books. And so you come on here, you pick your answer, and you go, yep, correct. And so this one here, what is the number of stair rises in a straight line? Same thing again. Probably not something you're going to be checked on, but you'd know which ones you need to know. And then when if you actually get it wrong, so it says how many type A bracing units equal a type B, and then basically you go 3, and it goes incorrect, and you can see then it highlights that in green that number 2 was the correct answer. So as I said, it's a great tool. I said the guys I find, the guys that I train in the face-to-face class when we're doing this in class with our spare time, even the guys who actually are going for their limited licenses are still getting above the 70% that they would need if they're going for a DBU license anyway. So obviously what you've learnt in the course outside the scope of your license, you'll probably still be able to answer the questions. And if you get them wrong, you're not going to be stressed out that you couldn't remember some of the stuff that would be for a DBU license more so than what's in yours. But I'll see if I can organise that for you. And then you'll find that when you get to the end, you can see up here it's counting down. And once you get to the end, it'll actually tell you what the percentage is that you got. And then they've created also a bit of a practical element to it as well. It's a little bit tricky the first couple of times you use it, but you can do some activities based on doing your bearer spacing and span and what size timbers that you need. Now, the advice that I'll give you is that when you do it, quite often the picture is only probably about as big as, from where it says time limit down to incorrect in that sort of rectangle. And so you look at it and you can't get the detail in the picture that you need. But if you click on the picture, it then goes to full screen. So then you can actually see and go, okay, well, there's two, because the classic one is there's two bearers that are actually basically nailed together or fixed together. And so when you're trying to work out the spacing in between them, obviously if there's two of them there, the spacing in between is going to be smaller than if you had one, and you can't actually see that until you make it full screen. So there's a few things like that on there, but it's a great tool to help you practice and probably keeps you engaged so you're not going over the same stuff over and over. And I'll organise that for you. I'll ask Maxine to send one over to you, and mate, have a crack at it and see how you go. There is one of them that I find the guys get a little bit frustrated on. It's heavily geared towards basically the business side of it. And the guys will tell you that when they go through that, they do actually get some business questions, but not nearly to the extent of what is that. I think it's test 3 or 4, but you'll know it when you go in there. But anyway, I'll organise that for you. So so that wasn't foreign to anyone else other than Ben, was it? I don't need to try and organise that for anybody else. No, that's all cool. So I'll hang around. It's funny. Normally the guys who hang around and chat to me the most are the ones who actually couldn't make it tonight. So if you guys have got any questions, by all means, I'll hang around. If not, we did that pretty quickly tonight in our 2 hours. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for you guys. But that's probably the shortest session that we probably do, I think. So if you've got nothing for me, that's all the content I needed to cover for tonight. And but I'll hang around if anyone's got any questions outside of basically the masonry or something you want me to go over. And otherwise, basically log out. I'll catch you next week, and hopefully the log-on's a bit smoother. And if you've got any questions, Jake, or we can catch up on Thursday night, mate, if you've got any questions about anything as well. So that's it from me. But also, what is next week? Good question. I'm pretty sure, I'll grab my folder, I'm pretty sure it's waterproofing. Just give me a second, mate. So module 10. Mate, is waterproofing. So next week will be waterproofing. Then we'll go on to our swimming pools and then on to our retaining walls. So I find the next couple of weeks, sort of because of what they're based on, they don't change too much, you know what I mean? Like the waterproofing doesn't sort of change depending on the footing classification. So you'll find probably the next couple of weeks will just be probably a bit of a repeat of what you've done previously. Like guys like to sit on and go over it and probably hear a second take on it. And then hopefully if we do get any, feedback from what guys are getting when they go in, then by all means I can pass it on to you guys. So that's what we'll be doing next Tuesday. All right, so cool guys. So that's it. I said I'll be here if you've got any questions. All right, cool. Jake, I'll get to that now. So Jeff, you can do that. Sorry mate, I mustn't have sent that through. I'll make a note of that. So I definitely do it. 1 second, I'll grab my paper. So subfloors one, hey Jeff. I'll send that over to you tonight. Cool. Yep. Mick, I'll send that to Mick as well. No worries about that one, Tom. Oh, so Mick wants tonight's one. Yep, cool. So tonight's one, yeah, as you know, I normally don't get to do it until basically Thursday or sometimes Friday. So I'm just getting through these questions, guys. I've just been bombarded. I can only see about 3 at a time. I'm just going to scroll back through them. So next one there was Omar. So with the latest VBA plan, Omar, no, actually, also, sorry, that might be what Greg's answered as well. So have I got the latest VBA plan? No, I haven't. So from what I gather, I might ask a couple of the guys who have gone through if they can do it up for me, because yeah, from what guys have told me, it's got a little bit of a step out for some bay windows, but no one's actually bought it through yet. But I'll follow that up with Maxine and see if she's been given anything, because most of the guys I've spoken to really can't remember it too well, and they didn't want to basically draw it up because they didn't think they could do it accurately enough. So I'll ask Maxine about that if any of the guys in Melbourne have got the latest plan. Oh, cool, Tom. So yeah, so when's your date, Tom? Cool. And so are you going for multiple choice, or are you straight to the interview because you got a diploma? Multiple choice. Cool, no worries at all. Yeah, you'll be right, mate. So I'll see if I can track down that latest plan for you, and at least you can know what to expect when you go in there. Like you've obviously seen that roofing one, haven't we? We covered that a week ago. So if you've got the roofing one, the only one it is that little bit about the raft slab, how they got those bay windows and sort of when you do the re-entrant corner, how it doesn't exactly line up. But yeah, you guys seem to be across that when we covered it anyway. All right, cool, no worries. All right, so just back to these questions. All right, cool. So I think, Jake, I think you're the last one got to answer. Sorry, mate. So I'll just find your question again for you. Yeah, I know what you're talking about there, Greg, too. All right, so hang on, let me come up to Jake. Here we go. Whereabouts in... All right, cool. So hopefully what I might do, Jake, I might actually put this up on the screen and we can share it. So give me a second, mate. I'll open up my Australian Standard and put it on the screen for the 2870. I'll just stop the recording there too.